a full agenda, so I don't want to delay more than is necessary. Great to see everybody again. Wish we could be together in Jackson, but it's good to use technology to connect. I hope everybody's safe and well. Send their warm thoughts everybody's way. Let's start with introductions. I think that helps us both affirm who's on the call and just do a bit of a sound check to make sure everybody can hear one another. So we don't all talk at once. I'll go over the participant list as I see it displayed. I think I realized last time it reorganizes a little bit as we go, so I'll try to take notes and keep track of who's greeted us. So Alan Burrow.
Yes, you can still see the PowerPoint, right?
I can, thanks, Alan. Okay. Yeah, and when I say your name to folks, just say good morning or hello or something. That way we can make sure we can hear you okay. Christy Hovenitz.
Good morning, Chris.
Hey, good morning, Christy. Deborah Donovan.
Good morning.
Hi, Deborah. Eddie Peasant. Sark.
Good morning.
Hi, Eddie. Good morning. Elaine Brewer.
Good morning.
Hi, Elaine. Gary Ragsdale.
Good morning.
Hello, Gary. Joanne Malone.
Good morning.
Hi, Joanne. Kelly Brown.
Good morning.
Hi, Kelly. Kristen Fondren.
Hello there.
Kristen. Lance Evans. Lance Evans, can you hear us? Didn't hear from Lance, so if you're speaking, maybe you're on mute. We'll come back to you in just a second. Lee Pombiaki, I hope I said your name right, Lee.
Good morning.
Good morning. Margie Pulley.
Good morning.
Hi, Margie. Marion Jones.
Good morning.
Hi, Marion. Scroll down a little bit. Ms. Kia Davis.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nathan Oakley. Nathan, can you hear us? Didn't hear you, Nathan. We'll come back to you just.
I'm with you, but my computer will not unmute.
Okay. All right. Hey, good morning, Nathan. Nicole Minotti.
Good morning.
Hi, Nicole. I'm not sure if there's I see an entry here in the participant list. It just says OTSS Skype. I don't know if that's just like an admin account or there's somebody there that.
Yes, Chris, that's just running the meeting.
Thanks, Deborah. Ryan Kirkendall. Ryan, can you hear us? I did not hear you, Ryan. So we'll come back. Charlotte Seals.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Wendy Faulkner.
Good morning.
Hi, Wendy. And don't remember the folks who I didn't hear from. Let me come back. Perhaps Lance Evans. Did we hear from you?
I'm here. Good morning.
Oh, hey, good morning, sir. Ryan, can you hear us okay? Okay, I see a note from Ryan in the chat saying that he'll call in. So it sounds like he's working on getting that worked out.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Nathan. I'm sorry.
I don't know if somebody was trying to speak or not.
Yeah,
Dr. Domaleski, this is Tim Martin.
Oh, hi there, Dr. Martin. Thank you.
Hey, this is Rich. This is Richard Balico. I got an email from Robin Ballard from Lowndes County. She says she's been trying to get accepted into the meeting when she called in.
Dr. Domaleski, this is Paula Vanderford. I'm on my phone and having technical difficulty logging in through my iPad to see, but I called in on the phone.
Thank you, Dr. Vanderford.
Yeah, this is Alan. I'm noticing a lot of hesitation and slowness. I don't know if that's a bandwidth issue with the videos. I've been on a lot of other meetings where they've asked everybody who's not speaking to turn off your video. Maybe if we try that. So if you're not speaking, if you'll just turn off your camera, then maybe that'll speed things up a little bit.
Yeah, so I had my video and I muted myself, but I couldn't hear you all. I could see the video, but I couldn't hear. So I'm gonna try again shortly with maybe some better service with my iPad.
Okay, thanks, Paula. Let me just do another sound check since I know I'll be doing a lot of talking. Can folks hear me? Can you just give me a note in the chat or give me a verbal?
I can hear you.
Okay.
This is Rosemary Altman. I'm on the group and I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rosemary.
I can hear you well.
Thanks, folks. Is there anybody whose name I didn't call that hadn't had a chance to greet us this morning?
Hey, yes. Good morning, Chris. This is Amy Brown with MDE.
Hi, Amy. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Good morning. This is Aaron Williams with Queen County School District.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Latoya Minor.
Okay, I heard Latoya Minor, and then would the other gentleman say hello again?
Yeah, this is Richard Balco. I've been talking, so
Okay, great.
about things, so I'm good.
Gotcha, Richard. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Dr. Domaleski, this is Ryan. Can you hear me now?
Gotcha, Ryan. Thank you. Has anybody else not had a chance to say hello this morning?
And again, Robin Ballard emailed me. She's having some technical difficulties trying to get in. So if someone can help her out, she reached out to me saying that she's not able to get into the meeting.
Okay. Alan, I'll have to ask, is there somebody on your end that can look into that? There's not like a waiting room or anything, right?
I think we have staff here from our technology office. I don't know how to help her get in personally. I don't see anybody that is waiting in the lobby.
Okay.
Alan, there's a way that you can invite them from inside the chat. I don't know if that would help for the people that are struggling, for you to send them an invite or not. I don't know if that'll help or not.
Okay, I'll look and see if I can figure that out.
I'm emailing Robin the invite. I'll send her the link.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. I'm going to suggest we go ahead and move forward because we have so much in our agenda, and perhaps if there's additional correspondence about technical issues, just interrupt me or put it in the chat, whatever works best. Alan, can you advance the slides, please, sir? Okay, yeah, let's linger here a moment. We do ask that you mute if you're not speaking. I am hearing a little bit of background noise, so I think it's always helpful if folks can be mindful of that. We will monitor the chat to the best of our ability, so don't hesitate to use that to make a comment. And I think everybody's name is set up okay in the participant list, so thank you for that. Next slide. And you can keep going, please. I think you can take us to the slide that gives the agenda, if you would, please, sir. Okay, great. Just a note about, excuse me, our agenda for today. We've done our welcome and introductions. I do want to give the MDE a chance to provide any updates and a welcome message there. So I'll pause as soon as I review the agenda and see if Mr. Burrow, Dr. Oakley, Dr. Vanifer, or anybody else from MDE wants to provide some opening remarks. But following that, the topics that we have for you this morning are, we're going to revisit the college career readiness and accountability piece. We've talked about that a few times, and our objective here is to see if we're ready to make a recommendation as a task force about how to move forward for the coming year, or if the task force wants to make a recommendation to proceed at a different pace or explore other alternatives. So we'll share with you a little bit what we're thinking to help give that conversation some structure. We'll take a break after that. Then we have two issues that we think will be fairly efficient. We'll see if I'm right about that, but we haven't budgeted a lot of time for it. Both of them are, well, the first one is actually, I think, fairly new to the group. We're going to talk about identifying the low 25 growth threshold for high school math examinees. I'll get more into that when we get to it in just a second. We have some interesting analyses to share with you and an idea that we want to float with the task force. Following that, we're going to revisit an issue that we talked about. I think it was last February and March, not of 20, but of 19. No, it was last February and March, where we we looked at growth for the alternate students, for the students with significant cognitive disabilities. And at the time, the task force came up with a proposal for how to handle that, which is, I think, is well documented. But you asked to see some impact data, and we have that to share with you today. And we're going to see if we can finalize that. We'll end, as we always do, by giving folks an opportunity to speak to future topics, and that's our plan for today. Let me pause here to see, before we get in, well, I'll probably spend just a moment on reflecting on the meeting notes from the last meeting, but let me pause here to see if any of my colleagues from the department have any opening remarks to share with the task force.
This is Alan. Let me turn my camera back on. Well, that's the wrong way. I can just kind of give an update on the work that we've been doing and the communications that we've been having with larger groups outside of the state, and kind of some expectations on federal regulations and requirements regarding accountability. We have several meetings coming up this month with our colleagues outside of Mississippi, and we're hoping to discuss flexibility and opportunities in regards to assessment and accountability for the upcoming school year and what that might look like with the disruptions that we've had. So we don't have any really concrete answers there yet, but just know that Mississippi, as well as many other states, are working to try to figure this out and figure out what the process is going to look like in the next academic year in regards to assessment and accountability. Paula, do you have any updates you'd like to offer?
Yeah, nothing except, to just follow up on what you just said. We know there's a lot of conversation, within the state and as well as among other states about flexibilities and waivers around assessment and accountability for the upcoming school year. We will have a board item for the state board that will be presented next week on June 11th regarding some accreditation and other state statute waivers. But we're very clear in that documentation that as of this time, that Ed has not granted any flexibility around assessment or accountability for the upcoming school year, nor has our legislature related to the state law requirements. So it'll be very clear in that documentation that we'll be moving forward with a plan to administer the assessments as well as produce accountability results, until such time that a waiver is granted. So we're not assuming that we're getting any waivers. We, want, as schools develop their reentry plans and their schedules, we want everyone to begin the school year with the assumption that there will be statewide assessments and that there will be accountability. So we're just trying to be clear because there's a lot of confusion because of the conversations that are going on and the questions that we're getting. But we have to ensure that the LEAs are aware of where we are at this point. So the language that we have in our board item for next week will not include unless any waiver is granted and so on and so forth, and not to, lead the stakeholders to believe that there is a waiver coming that we're just waiting on. So we're just trying to send that clear message as school begins that we're moving forward as if there'll be no flexibility whatsoever.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vanderfer, Mr. Burrow. Yeah, I think that's wise. Until anything is known, we think it's wise to assume that federal constraints will be in place next year.
Yeah. Dr. Oakley, do you have anything to add to that? Because you've been a part of all those conversations.
No, I think you captured it well, Paul. Paul's team and the academic team have been working back and forth on this as we're looking at waivers and waivers around Carnegie units and the other topics across offices. So watch for more to come after the board next week.
Great, thank you, Dr. Oakley. I'll say just a word about the meeting notes from April, although I won't linger on those. I believe folks got those last day or two, so it would be understandable if you haven't had a chance to look those over yet. So as we typically say, if you have an opportunity to review them after the meeting and have some feedback about those notes, then please share it with the department, and they'll make sure that I get that. It will adjust them as appropriate. Folks will recall that when we last met, we talked about reporting. We went over the indicators. We captured some guidance from the task force. In general, the task force advised us not to report accountability information sort of in part or in whole in any kind of accountability metric, for example, as an index score or grade or anything like that. But where intact, uncompromised data may be available, that may be suitable for public report. However, if the data are impacted, so for example, it's partial data or the context around it would alter its interpretation and use, that sharing that more internally would be a preferred approach, and certainly having that accompanied with information to support appropriate interpretation and use. Those are the high points. There's a little bit more detail in the meeting notes. We talked about computing academic growth at the last meeting as well. We shared some district results. We had, I think, a good conversation about how it should be interpreted and used, what the expectation should be, the inability to model a, quote, pandemic effect as an ongoing challenge. I think in general, we didn't make a recommendation there. We said it would be useful to see school level results, and we bookmarked that for a future meeting. I think we'll be revisiting growth in a subsequent meeting. And then we talked about career readiness and accountability. We went over some options. The task force provided some guidance about those options. That's actually what we're going to pick up today, so it's probably good to end here, and I can pick up where we left off on our first topic. And then we heard from you about some additional topics that we should explore moving forward. So I'll pause here to see if any task force members have any immediate reactions about the meeting summary, if you've had a chance to look it over. If not, I'll just reiterate my invitation to give that a read afterwards and let us know if any edits might be appropriate. So we'll go ahead and move forward and take up our first topic. I don't think, given that this group has met times, I don't think stopping to talk about our purpose or our norms is necessarily a good use of time. So we'll get right into the first topic, if I might. As I mentioned in describing the agenda and just reflecting on the notes from the April meeting, we're really at a point now where we want to see what the sense for the task force is regarding inclusion of career readiness and accountability. I'm deliberately using the term career readiness and accountability and not WorkKeys and accountability, because I'm not assuming that any one particular measure or indicator is really what this is about. I think what it's about is strategizing about the kinds of approaches that can more broadly represent the range of skills and attributes that we value for students in Mississippi, to demonstrate that they're ready for post-secondary success for college or careers. Many have opined that the WorkKeys is a good instrument to do that, or that diploma endorsements may be a good mechanism to do that. And those are the two general approaches that we've talked about in the prior few meetings. So today we want to see if there's a specific approach that we're ready to endorse, and it's okay if the task force says we're not, that we need more time to talk, to study, to model, but we want to give folks an opportunity to, we're going to give you another bite of the apple before the window for considering something for next year might close. And so the next slide, please. Yeah, I think we can move through these pretty briskly. I included some slides just to remind folks how career readiness, college and career readiness is currently reflected. I feel like this is pretty well understood by many folks, and we can use the slides that I have subsequent to this one as reference points. But actually, go backwards if you would. Yeah, let's the next slide, please. Okay, so we've got last meeting we shared two options with you, and we modified them in response to the feedback that we received. So the first option was to have ACT or WorkKeys. When we last spoke to you in April, we had shared an idea of sort of a combination of ACT and WorkKeys in the college career readiness indicator, that they would have equal weight, they would be combined in a compensatory way, and they would influence the college career ready outcome. And what we heard, and what you'll see reflected in the meeting notes that I was just describing, is that folks said, we'd rather have that be an or statement. We call that a disjunctive approach, where we say a student can meet the threshold on either ACT or WorkKeys, they get the better of the two. So that's the revised option one that we're bringing to the group today to take a look at and give us feedback on. Option two is only changed in a nuanced way. Many folks said diploma endorsement better belongs in acceleration. There's a number of ways to do that. We're going to show you one. And I'll get to that in more detail in just a moment. So yeah, actually skip over the next two slides. They'll just be useful for reference. What I did was just recovered the representations of the model so you can see what we're working with here. So option one, here's just a bit more detail about that. I mentioned that it's been revised to be an or statement. Currently, readiness is 50 points in the high school model, which is determined by the percent of students who meet ACT benchmarks. If the task force endorsed this approach, then WorkKeys would be added as an alternative. We would determine a benchmark that's comparable to the ACT. We're not ready to give you that number today. We previously, I think the first time we took this up during the 2020 cycle of task force meetings, we suggested some approaches that would be used and some research we could rely on, but essentially we would strive to find a performance threshold that's statistically determined to be comparable to the ACT, so they're of equal rigor, that's meaningful and comparable to the ACT. And then that college and career readiness score would reflect the student's ACT or WorkKeys performance, whichever is more favorable. Under this approach, schools can't do worse than they would do with ACT. So it is kind of a hold harmless approach. They can, if a student performs well on WorkKeys but not ACT, then they'll favorably impact the indicator. If a student performs well on ACT but not WorkKeys, then they'll do at least as well as was done in the previous version of the model. So that's option one. We're happy to talk more about that as circumstances are appropriate. I think next I'm just going to say a little bit more about option two, and then I'm going to take a breath and hear your feedback. So again, there's a number of ways to do this. When we prepare for these meetings, we try to just provide illustrations to give some structure and momentum to the conversation, but we fully recognize that there are multiple ways that we could be moving forward with this. So here's one. If you decide that diploma endorsement is really the way to go as the way to represent college career readiness in the accountability system, one approach to put it into the acceleration is to take, this particular illustration shows taking 10 points out of a 50-point indicator. So currently it has maximum 50 points, which is equally divided between participation and performance for various outcomes that, again, we can say more about if you want a reminder. One option to include the diploma endorsement is to reduce acceleration to 40 points. So now it would be 20 for each of participation and performance, yielding us the additional 10 points to work with for diploma endorsements. And this model is based on weighting different endorsement types by the values that you see here. So you can imagine 1.25 for a distinguished endorsement, 1 point for a traditional or any type of endorsement. And then if a student doesn't receive an endorsement, then they don't get any points. And then you just determine that percentage of points earned out of points possible. And you see a little table there that shows how that would work. And that determines how many of the 10 points that a school would receive. So again, that would just come out of the acceleration component. So, I mean, obviously, all of that can be tinkered with if you feel the particular values or the weights out of balance. But I think an important question embedded in this topic is, to what extent are diploma endorsements desirable to the task force as the mechanism to value college and career readiness in the Mississippi accountability system? I just have one more slide, and then I really want to open it up to your feedback. Yeah, so these are the discussion questions that we want to tee up here. Do one of the options seem appealing, either as presented or with revisions? And do you want to move forward sooner than later to explore those options? We do not have data on WorkKeys with the performance threshold to share with you now, and we don't have endorsement data available. If the task force is thinking that that would be very important to evaluate those options and make a recommendation, is it the voice of the task force to defer a decision until more research can be conducted? We could also think of 2021 as something of a pilot year where we collect, analyze, discuss outcomes, and use that to inform a recommendation for a subsequent year of accountability. So I will stop here. Thanks for being patient as I went through some opening slides, and I'd love to hear your feedback.
Can you flip back to option 2 again?
And maybe a good way to begin to stimulate some conversation here is to say, did any members of the task force want to make a comment about whether you think we ought to be pursuing an option that's based on incorporating WorkKeys, or whether we ought to be pursuing an option that's based on diploma endorsements? Do folks feel strongly that one or the others of these indicators is really the basis of what we should be looking at for Mississippi's accountability system? Or maybe another indicator we haven't yet talked about, which would surprise me, but we can certainly go in whatever direction that the team wants to go in.
Good morning, Chris. This is Nikki Minotti. And I've said this before. I have two schools of thought going on right now. For a district as small as mine is, that does not have its own college and career, we don't have a CTE program. We have to bus our students and lots of different things. I really am leaning towards option 1. However, with everything that's going on right now, I liked what you said about, giving it this year and then making a decision. I really hate to put more pressure on superintendents seeing what they're going through right at this moment trying to reopen school. Just a thought.
Hey, can we move the slide back to option 1? Good morning. This is Christopher. Can you hear me?
So this is Lance Evans. And looking at both the options, I like them both, but the one that was my personal original intent was more like option one. I know you opened it up to some opinions. I would love to hear other opinions on that, but my original intent personally, just from creating the stimulating the importance of it, was option one.
This is Charlotte Sales. I guess I kind of go with Lance in thinking about our original discussion in terms of trying to increase the use of WorkKeys, et cetera, and option trying to get our kiddos certified. I think option one sticks a little bit more if that's your purpose, but I like the or in it because not every child I don't want to see us personally from our district having to force both of them, but to have the option ACT or WorkKeys, I think is good.
So I was also concerned about that and pleased to see the or in there. This is Lee. I was concerned because I think that our initial conversation at the beginning of the year was surrounded by more testing. We've got too much testing and we were trying to take away testing. And now we're adding additional testing, which kind of contradicts everything that we've said. But if we are going with the or, that would substitute, it would be one or the other. So it wouldn't add additional testing. Regardless of what it's for, testing is testing, and testing to teachers, students, and the public is viewed as testing. So I hope that made sense. But the or does allow us the option of picking ACT or WorkKeys, which doesn't add an additional test, which just substitutes it, which I prefer that over requiring everyone to take a test that is not necessary for them to take.
This is Richard. I agree. I think having a menu of items is always the best way to go, in my opinion.
And this is Christy.
So the or meant only, if I'm understanding correctly, as we're stating, it really only applies to accountability. So districts are on their own unless we or some other body does something about or puts parameters around. Hey, this is the group that takes that. If not, just to be honest with you, if a district wants to quote up their points, then they'll just require all juniors to take both, and it's the better of. So we may need to set some parameters or discuss that further, or if that's not this body, how does that work? Because like was just said, if not, we're adding a test, or we're certainly giving people the ability to just simply add a test. So that's something to think about.
Which is totally contradicting everything that we've said all year long.
I do think, this is Nikki Minotti again, and I'm on, like I've told you, I'm on the Lieutenant Governor's Task Force also. So it's going to come whether we want it to or not. It's going to come through legislation if necessary. So I think that we don't need to really, I think we just need to figure out the best option that'll help our people because it's coming.
And this is Eddie Passant. I would just like to echo everything that Charlotte and Lance said. This is what we were looking for. These students, yeah, we're all taking the ACT, and then a lot of us are still giving those students who it applies to, they're taking the WorkKeys. So they'll take it either with us or they'll take it as they're going into the workforce because that's what they're requiring of them. And so if we're working to help them prepare for it, and those students who are needing that to go in their through their pathway, I think that option one is going to help our students, and then it'll also help us help them achieve those goals.
So I understand the concern about more testing, and I understand the concern that kids are going to end up taking this anyway into the workforce. To me, it is so disheartening to think that we're going to take away an opportunity for kids to take ACT. By giving this as an or, it means kids can either take ACT or they can take WorkKeys. And I feel like we're retrenching back so far, giving kids an opportunity to take a college entrance exam. And if we don't like it just because of the accountability, then let's change the accountability. Let's not change the opportunity for those kids to take a free college entrance exam. And so I feel really strongly about this, and I do not think that this is a good way to say kids can do one or the other. It's either we don't retrench on our opportunity to give all kids equal access to a free ACT, and we look at WorkKeys independently. This feels very wrong to me to make this an option.
Dr. Domaleski, this is Tim Martin. My take on it was a little different than Christy's. And tell me if I'm wrong. My take would be all juniors would still take the ACT. And then those students who do not meet the benchmark score on ACT, we would be able to use the WorkKeys as another measure with some predetermined benchmarks for them to meet that college readiness. So it would not take away the opportunity for them to take the ACT, but they would have an opportunity to take the WorkKeys in addition to that to meet that goal.
Yeah,
Well, and that's part of the reason I don't think this should be part of the college and career readiness indicator. This needs to be moved to acceleration. We still need to give kids the opportunity, every kid the opportunity to take ACT, whether they meet the college readiness standards or not, and whether we offer them a WorkKeys assessment or not. We still need to give them the opportunity to take a free college entrance exam.
But under this, what I just said though, Dr. Lime, this would allow every student would still take the ACT as juniors. That would not change. But then if they did not meet the benchmark score in the one that's provided by the state, and then the district could choose to give them WorkKeys as a second option. They would still all take ACT.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this from an elementary mind, okay, so this would be, I agree with everything that Christy said. I mean, this, for a ton of our boys and girls, this is the only opportunity they have to take the ACT, and it is the only way that they will get to college. Okay, so, but if I'm understanding this right, what you're saying, Dr. Martin, is that it would be, everybody would still take the ACT, but we would use the WorkKeys almost like a retake. It's not. I know it wouldn't be a retake to replace a score, but it would be the counselors would have a list of those who did not meet the benchmark, and just those boys and girls would take the WorkKeys. Is that what you're saying?
That would be my understanding. That's how. I mean, I'm not. That would be my recommendation for it.
Yeah, that has been my intent the entire time. I'm sorry if anybody thought that this is Lance. Anybody misunderstood that I thought that we wouldn't take the ACT. I think it's a travesty to not allow the students, to not mandate them take it. Actually, the way it currently is, all 11th graders, that's never been my intent at all. I mean, it has always and will always continue to be, like Tim is saying, by all means, we're going to give the ACT to all students. This is another, just to reiterate what my colleagues have said, this is just another, it's an additional opportunity for those students who the ACT has a bearing on their in decisions in life, but also allows our students those other opportunities. Just like I know Eddie he said this several times, our communities, we've trained them to understand the importance of WorkKeys, and that's what, and I'm reiterating what their feelings are as well, not just my personal feelings, So, but no, all those students will still take that ACT. I mean, that's a very important part of their opportunities over the course of their high school career. So I apologize if someone misunderstood what I was saying.
And I'd like to add to what Lance said. For me, it wouldn't even be about looking for kids and basing, determining if they take the WorkKeys based on their ACT. If their goal is to go to college, first of all, I do agree that all students must take the ACT. I agree 100% with that. But if if their goals are to go to college, then we work with them and we use their ACT. Kids who need the WorkKeys are taking it anyway. And those are the kids that I would think that would be eligible, and they would have another score that could be considered. I wouldn't just search out students just because they didn't do as well on the ACT as we may have wanted them to do. I wouldn't just have them take the WorkKeys just for a second opportunity. They're taking the WorkKeys if they need it and if that aligns with their pathway.
Of which most of those kiddos, like you're saying, Eddie, I feel like many of the kids are already taking career tech courses. If they're taking those courses, it makes sense for them to be able to take the WorkKeys in addition to taking the ACT.
So let me check in here and see if we can clarify a few issues and find where we have agreement and where we may still have some issues to sort through. I think I want to make sure I clarify for myself what the current state policy and practice is with respect to the ACT. This may be for Dr. Oakley or Dr. Vanifer or Mr. Burrow. So as I understand it, the state funds ACT for everybody. And does the state require that all students take the ACT?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All
so
11
for accountability purposes, yes, we do require that all students are in that denominator in the calculation for that ACT component. Correct, Alan?
That's right. So all 11
pairs
required to take the ACT, and for the CCR component, we start with the state administration of the ACT for the whether or not students meet the benchmarks. All students are included in the denominator, and then students have the opportunity to take the ACT on other occasions to increase their or improve their score, and we include those additional test administrations in the calculation in the end.
Thank you.
They are required.
Terrific. Yeah, thanks. That's what I assumed, and I just wanted to affirm that. And what I understand, and I've heard many voices chime in to clarify, those that are in support of option one as it's currently drafted, to say that nothing about that recommendation is thought to change that. That ACT would still be administered as a census assessment to all students in the state of Mississippi. There wouldn't be an option to take one or the other. You're going to take ACT regardless. And I'll get to the second part in just a moment. And I think what we would do if we do decide to move forward with this recommendation is just simply make sure that that's very clearly articulated in our recommendation, in our meeting notes, that the task force doesn't want to disturb the current census administration of ACT that's occurring. Now, with respect to WorkKeys, and I see a number of comments in the chat to this point, so we should take this up. My understanding, and this is something I want to check in on here in a second, is many, but not all students in the state of Mississippi take the WorkKeys. It's not currently funded and administered as a census test, but there seems to be some, there's a sense that that's likely coming. Nothing is, I think, a done deal now, but that WorkKeys would be an assessment that, and again, somebody should help clarify this for me, that many districts give that on their own. And for those that do, and for students who have an opportunity to take WorkKeys in addition to ACT, then they'd have another mechanism to show that they've met some threshold for a readiness bar. But maybe somebody could just comment on the state of the state with respect to WorkKeys administration now and moving forward.
So, Chris, I just want to re-clarify on the required to take ACT. The only reason students are required to take ACT right now is for the college and career readiness indicator. If that turns into an or option, there's no requirement in law or business rules that say kids need to take ACT other than for the purposes of accountability. So I just want to be really clear that we're not creating or opening an avenue for kids to just say, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to take it. It's not part of the participation. It's not part of, this. We'll get credit for you in a different way. So
yeah, that's a fair point. And I think the way probably for us to make sure that we don't provide some kind of loophole that's going to be outside the intent of the task force is to say the only way the WorkKeys the only way attaining a qualifying score on the WorkKeys meets that readiness threshold if it's also accompanied by participation in the ACT. So it's those two things that make the alternative. And again, that's not reflected on the slide. So I think you're right to say we need some assurance.
I think we would have pushback from Ed if we were to change that requirement. I know when we made our initial ask, we had to clarify that denominator for the ACT as a part of that ESSA planning. So to eliminate the requirement, I think Ed would likely have some additional questions on our accountability model.
Right. So let me just make sure we're not talking past each other, Nathan. So what I'm suggesting, this is responsive to Christy's point, and I think addressing your point is, so if the or statement is they either meet the readiness requirement via the ACT as currently occurs, or they meet it on the WorkKeys in addition to having participated in the ACT. So none of that, none of the ACT participation requirement goes away.
We're on the same page. I just want to
Okay.
clarify that that was an Ed requirement as well, that we make that in place for all students, and to eliminate it would cause a problem. So I think your solution may be viable.
So let's get back to WorkKeys and the state of the state with respect to administration. And again, this is something I think I'd ask the department to help me out with. Right now, it's not state funded or state required, but it sounds to me like there's some expectation that it may be soon.
Yes, so I can speak to the Lieutenant Governor's request because he came and presented to the State Board of Education, and he said that it is his intent that he will get funding for ACT WorkKeys for all students who want to take it in the state. So he didn't necessarily state that it would be required for all students, but that the state that he was going to work to try to secure funding, and that he wanted WorkKeys to be included in the accountability system because what gets measured gets done, as he put it. But as of right now, we don't collect data at the state level on WorkKeys. We don't have a state contract with ACT to administer WorkKeys. And I believe as far as districts go, either districts are paying for it or they're getting some funding from local industry to administer WorkKeys. And maybe someone else can talk about what the funding looks like on the local level. But that's pretty much where we are.
Yeah,
Hey,
thanks, Alan.
So it sounds like everyone's on the same page with wanting to do this, but now Alan just helped with, to do this, think back when we added the ACT several years ago. The ACT was not in the accountability model, and then it was added when this current model came into fruition around 2014 or so. So that was, the one requirement was, well, the state has to fund it. It has to be equal across all districts, the opportunity, or you can include it as an accountability measure. So that's the real issue here as we get to is, so, how is that, who is it going to be funded for? Like, what group of students? How do we do that? How is that equal across the state? Can we even make that decision? That kind of thing, because otherwise you can't include it in the model. But I agree, we all want to, and we all like how what we're saying here. If you don't meet this, well then, here's the other option for those career type students. And I think that makes total sense. But we've got to get equal funding, and it has to be in the funding, and we have to understand who's going to take it and who's not, and looks across, all districts where that is equal. So to me, that's the big issue.
So Ryan, in your view, and I'm not necessarily calling the question on it, I just want to make sure I understand your stance here. In your view, option one, as amended, would be viable if the state supported statewide administration of WorkKeys. And if that's not the case, is it your view that we shouldn't move forward with this option?
Absolutely. I think a rule is you cannot include it in accountability unless it is equal opportunity across the state via state funding for the same groups of students. Just like we would have never included ACT if they didn't do the junior ACT as a state funded, it wouldn't be in the model now. and so you can't do it. But I am in support of doing it if we can. I absolutely agree it's best for students, and I think it's a great way to go.
I just want to remind everybody, when we first brought this up, the concern was that there was a population that was negatively impacting the assessment model. And that was our SPED population, who are not college bound, who are not going to be able to make it at VOTEC and get the certification in that realm. This was for the kids who were going to have employment in the community. And that's why the community is back behind it. These are the skills that the students need for real life. And those students are not being adequately acknowledged in a positive light in the assessment model. And I think we need to refocus that was our intent, was because of our vision statement. We want all of our students to be addressed and allowed opportunities to be successful outside of high school, regardless if they're going to college, career, military, whatever. This was another option to acknowledge those students, support those students, and let it positively affect the accountability for the schools.
Dr. Domleski, although I am fully supportive and in favor of adding WorkKeys, I was one of the first ones to bring that to the table. I do not want to make it a requirement that all students take the ACT and then turn around and all students take the WorkKeys. My thought would be those students who we know are going into CTE fields. They're not going to go to four-year colleges. They've made that plain. We have identified they didn't meet the benchmark scores. This would be another option for those students. And then the state would pay for it in a reimbursement type of, there would be maybe less students taking WorkKeys in some districts and more students taking WorkKeys in another district, but it would still be equal because the state's going to pay for it regardless of how many students take it.
This is Lance. I completely agree with what Tim's saying. That was my intent the entire time. It was an opportunity for students who needed it. Just as an opportunity.
So, Dr. Martin, this is Ryan. Under your model you were just talking about, so what would the timeline, what would you be thinking on that? So districts would determine, okay, these are CTE PATH students. These students also, the ACT is not going to, quote, help them in the future. So these are the students that we're gonna set up and pay for and give the WorkKeys to whenever that occurs. Maybe it's their junior year, early senior year, I don't know the timeline. And then there's going to be some sort of document that we submit to MD through SharePoint, and then there's a reimbursement that occurs. Am I understanding?
Ryan, this is Alan. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions at this point. When this initially came up, my first response was, okay, first we need to secure funding, then we need the infrastructure in place, so to speak. So students and districts and schools need to know, what this is going to look like, and then we would incorporate it into accountability measures. So some of these things I don't know that we have the answer to as of now. I can say, because of discussions with ACT, that if we enter into a state contract with ACT, we would get all of the data for WorkKeys straight from ACT. And as far as reimbursement goes, I really think we got to wait and see what the Lieutenant Governor is going to propose to the legislature and what the legislature is going to do with it at this point, because we really don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see on those.
Hey, this is Nikki Minotti. I don't think that it's going to the legislature this year just because of the COVID crisis, and we are looking at quite a bit of reduction in funding right now. but it is going to eventually go, but I just don't know that it'll go this year.
So here's where I think I am in digesting the feedback of the task force. It sounds like there's sort of two dimensions at play. One is whether option one is contingent on statewide required and supported administration of WorkKeys. So as one example, that's something that Ryan put his chips on the table and said that would be his assumption, that we shouldn't move forward until that's the case. I think there may be some other voices that say, nope, we're willing to move forward sooner than later, even if there's not a census administration. So I'm not putting my thumb on the scale. I'm just saying I'm hearing some voices on either side of that issue. And then there's another issue that I'm hearing two distinct voices on, and that has to do with whether ACT remains a requirement. I've heard some voices, such as Christy, say, I'm not in favor of any proposal where ACT doesn't remain a requirement. Also heard Nathan say that he's worried that lifting that could cause some problems with federal compliance. But then I've heard other people say it really should be an alternative, that we don't want to have a student take both tests if there's a judgment that the student's better served and better suited to take WorkKeys. Again, not weighing in on that personally, but those are the two dimensions I hear, which makes me think if we were in the room together, maybe I'd grab a whiteboard or a piece of paper and we could draw that out on a 2x2 matrix. So I think what we have now is kind of a 1A, B, C, and D based on where you fall on those different dimensions. So for example, a 1A would be somebody that says, let's move forward sooner than later. ACT participation requirement remains. Somebody said, let's move forward only when we get statewide administration. So forth with each of those different configurations. So I want to follow the guidance of the task force here in making a recommendation. Do folks have a as one or the other of those? Can we see if there's some agreement on? Such as, let's take up the one about WorkKeys. What's the temperature of the task force with respect to, do you feel like a recommendation ought to be based on statewide administration and support for WorkKeys, and you don't want to move forward until that's in place? Would anybody just respond to that?
Yes, this is Richard. I agree with what you just said, with what Ryan said, that approach.
Is there anybody that disagrees? Is there anybody that says, let's please not wait for any kind of legislative act or any kind of statewide administration? Let's move forward as soon as possible, and the ones that give it would have that option, and the ones that don't can decide how they want to handle it. Is there anybody that supports that view?
I'm sorry. Can I get someone to give me an opinion on what's the difference in, as far as we're talking about state required funding for WorkKeys? Can I get any kind of feedback on the difference in that and AP or IB exams?
So Eddie, are you making a point that's currently there's variability with respect to district practices for availability and funding for AP, and that's a component in accountability. So
yes,
should we assume the same is the case for WorkKeys? Is that the point you're making?
That's my question. I guess I'm looking for feedback on.
Okay.
This is Tim Martin. I'm in full agreement with Dr. Bazant that if you've got districts that are already giving WorkKeys right now, why couldn't it go ahead and be included in the model for those districts? We don't currently give WorkKeys except in some very limited instances. But if it was an option, I think we would probably, even before funding comes, we would find ways to increase our testing of WorkKeys to more students.
So this is Ryan. The difference between AP and dual credit in acceleration versus WorkKeys and ACT in college career medicine, in my opinion, would be that yes, the score comes from an AP, the actual test. That is true, but it's a class thing. It's a class-based thing that any district can offer, and then the student just signs up to take the test. Dual credit is a class. You know, you have to obviously work with community colleges and various things like that, but it's, quote, a class. These are tests, you know, just 100% tests, have nothing to do with a, quote, class. And so to me, that difference means that it has to be equal across all the districts, just because it's all districts don't give the class like they do on the acceleration things. This is you take the test or you don't. So, and it's just a test, just like we wouldn't have math and reading growth if all students didn't have access to it, equal access to it. So to me, that's the difference there. I absolutely like Dr. Martin's method of not everybody has to take WorkKeys. You take it if it's correct for your path, and or you didn't meet the ACT benchmark, but everybody still takes the ACT as a junior. Nothing changes with ACT technically. I love all that. I think that's a good route to go, and but reimbursement. But there's just other groups that have to help work that out, if you will. So if you just add it into the model right now, and it's just, hey, free for all, go whoever takes it, we're going to add this to it. That's not equal distribution across all the districts, because it's a test. Not everybody has access to that class like they do with the other one. So to me, that would be the hold up there. But I do love the
think that's
direction
the
of
same with
option
AP and IB,
a
though.
lot. I think it's very necessary for the students and the district to move forward.
But to add to that, this is Lance. I think, in reiterating something Eddie said, I do agree with the IB and the dual enrollment pieces, the AP pieces. Obviously MD or the state doesn't pay for that. And there's plenty of districts who don't offer those courses. But I also know in our case with WorkKeys, it's embedded in an actual course. And that's an elective course. And any school district has the right to offer any course that they like. As far as they do it in a way to where as far as just meeting the requirements set forth by MDE. So, I understand and I wholeheartedly appreciate the idea of equity. And the equity is a huge part of our belief and my belief system. But I also understand the opportunity to move forward. And I also understand the opportunity of working through different pieces of it. But just like I said, it is an option if people choose to do so. And then you're also going to have people who say, well, we don't have career and technical centers. Well, they can be embedded into a course that's this course is in, college and career readiness courses. There is opportunities for that to take place if people were to do that, because there are schools that don't offer AP courses. There are schools that they don't necessarily require their students to take the AP test. So, I can see both sides of it. My thing is, I just know that we have students out there who are graduating every year who need credentials. We are credential shy. We don't have the credentials in our states that other states have and offer their students. So, my thing is to be able to create opportunities for kids, create pathways with no dead ends. And it's just all that has to be considered, because this could be 3 years from now if we're waiting on certain pieces to take place. That's one opinion.
I agree with what y'all are saying. This is Nikki Minotti again. And I especially agree with what was said earlier about our special education population, because once we kind of felt like this was coming and those children were not being served, we've added a resource teacher at the high school to start getting these students more prepared for WorkKeys, because we have to prepare them for life. And I think that what you're all saying, I agree with Dr. Martin and Dr. Passant. I think we need to move forward.
Alan, can I do a screen share? I want to try to show folks these options as I'm hearing them. Okay, I don't know Teams as well as I should, so be patient with me here. Is my screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay. All right. The Teams stuff went away, but assume you guys can hear me, maybe see me. This is the matrix that I was talking about that I think is what I'm hearing as we talk about this. That's why I said I think there's like 4 different options that I'm hearing on the table. If you just look at the columns, I think I hear some voices saying, let's move forward as soon as possible. Maybe that's next year. Maybe that's after a period of research occurs. But folks are saying we don't need to wait till there's statewide administration. That's sort of one category of voices I'm hearing. That second column of folks that are saying I only support the option once it's uniformly available and accessible to all districts and schools in the state. The rows are this piece we were talking about before about whether ACT participation requirement remains, because again, I've heard some different voices there. I've heard Dr. Martin, for example, say that ACT should be an option. I've heard Christy say that ACT participation requirement should remain. So this is just my way of trying to get my head around the different options that are on the table now and the way I've heard folks kind of split this up. So it sounds like there's a decent number of folks that are saying keep ACT in place and only do this when statewide administration is available. If that's your view, then I'm calling you an option 1B, and then you can see the other categories. So I don't know the extent to which this helps, but I'm trying to get a sense for how much agreement we have. As I listen to everybody, sounds like there's quite a diversity of views right now.
This is Charlotte. I mean, I think that I see 1A. I feel like most people feel like the ACT needs to stay as a requirement. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I see it. I think the debate would maybe be between 1A and 1B for most people.
I agree, but I really have a hard time being in favor of adding it to the accountability model just yet and having it have the impact it will have when we don't have any data on it yet. We don't have full information on it yet. It would just be more of we've got this information, let's add it because it's convenient to add and it'll help some districts. But is that the right thing to do right now when we don't know how it's going to impact us?
I'm curious as to what kind of data people are looking for. I mean, there's data from the company itself and other districts that have used it. What kind of data do we want?
So to make a recommendation, you would want data to see how it actually impacts accountability. And unfortunately, we don't have that because that's not reported to MD, the WorkKeys. So I do think that's a fair point. And the truth is, like for instance, we're not even discussing COVID issues going in, this meeting going into next year because so much is unknown. And MD told us they're discussing all that with other states and the U.S. Department of Ed. So I don't know, I hate to say it, but the rush to run it through before we, data, but then also too because of we don't have any idea really what the state is going to do as to who takes it, who don't, and how that's funded and how that's not. So, there's so many unknowns. I kind of agree, too, it does feel a little bit, rushed because maybe, quote, this is the last meeting of the year. But Dr. Domaleski, I love that table. I really think you've summed it up very, very, very well from what I've heard. So I'm personally probably in the 1B category. So.
Yeah, I agree. This is Richard, and I think that, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, every single decision we've made, or at least since I've been on the task force, that there's been statewide impact data that has been presented to us to inform us about making a decision for or against something. So, and we just don't have that data for WorkKeys. I'm not saying that we shouldn't include it, but I'm saying that we'll be going against a trend that we've done in the past, regards to looking at impact data.
Well, we are past the time for a break. We're not close to reaching a consensus on this issue. Here's what I'll recommend. Can we take a quick 5 minutes, just because we've been going for a while, and folks might just need a quick stretch break or an opportunity to top off their coffee cup. Let's come back. It's 10:16 Central Time. Let's come back at 10:21. I'm gonna start talking in 5 minutes, whether you're here or not, and then we'll see how close we can get to affirming a path forward. So let's go for a 5 minute quick stretch break, and we'll resume. I'm just going to mute myself and turn off my camera, and I'll come right back. Okay, colleagues, I know that was a quick break. I hope people have had a chance to come back together. Again, let me take try to get a sense of where we are. I was hearing a little discussion before we broke that led me to believe that we might be getting something of a shared view about the ACT, which is that first row there about the ACT participation requirement remaining. Is there anybody that wants to speak to that? Does everybody agree with that, or are there folks that still feel that ACT should be an option if we include WorkKeys in the model? The participation in ACT should be an option.
Dr. Domleski, I don't want to be confused at all in saying that I'm wanting to take away or making an option. I believe all juniors should still be required to take ACT. It's an opportunity. Some of them, the only opportunity they have to take that test, and some of them might not think that they're college material until they take the ACT and realize that they actually are. So I don't want to diminish that requirement at all in anything that we do with WorkKeys.
And this is Eddie Passant. I am on the same exact page with Tim Martin and what he just stated. I do not think the ACT participation requirement should be removed. So that's not a thought of mine at all. I will say that while I have the microphone, I know we've used impact data for other decisions and when we should have, but just to use it for this, just because we've done it in other cases, does not warrant us doing it if it's not necessary. I don't understand what we'll be looking to get from that. We understand that adding this component wouldn't negatively impact you at all, because we would take the higher of the two in those cases where it was necessary. So I don't understand the need. I don't understand what we're looking to get from impact data from this, and where and when will we get that?
Yeah, I don't think, this is Lance. I'm going to reiterate. I think the question should be: is anyone against taking the ACT out? Or excuse me, is anyone against doing away with the ACT as a requirement? Now, I don't think anybody has said that. So I honestly would like to see, hey, the question asked, is there anyone, because you can just remove one of those, A1, whichever one it is. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but we just can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result.
Yeah,
it's just it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to everybody that spoke to that. That's helpful, and it does sound like we're coalescing on that. I mean, I do. Ryan makes a point in the comment. Ryan, I think it's an important point, which is simply that if you don't have guidelines about who takes it, then there are going to be schools and districts that just say, let's give the WorkKeys as broadly as possible. It is going to amplify the amount of testing that happens in the state. And I don't know, Ryan, do you want to speak to that?
I'll also first say, to your point, I know I've kind of been vocal about we've got to have state guidelines first. But I also agree with everything Dr. Martin and Lance and Eddie just said, that I absolutely agree that ACT, we don't change anything with it. It's still given to all juniors and so on. So really, I guess 1C and 1D probably go away, I guess is what it would be. So we're down to 1A versus 1B, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, we're making progress. I haven't heard anybody yet defend.
And so my thing with 1A, and this is just I mean, just honestly, and I'm not just history of accountability in the state. I've been around it a long time, as a lot of you have, and unfortunately, how sometimes how that goes is if we do have accountability next year and there are not state guidelines and clear guidelines as to how the funding works and who takes it, who does it, then there's going to be some high school principals that want to just give them both to everyone. And so now we're doing what we've said we don't want to do, which is add an assessment, and is that assessment best for students? So I think that's that's one of the problems with 1A, along with its total unequal distribution. It's just a matter of hey, you know, who gives it and who doesn't at this moment. And back to the question about data and this only helps, it doesn't hurt, and that kind of thing. You also got to be careful with the only helps, because remember, once 65% of the districts are A or B, then an automatic reset of cuts has to happen, and we have to go back to that 10% percentile method under our current rules, which everyone hates. And if you think people are unhappy now, wait till we do that. And so we were at 46% by my calculations in 18-19, and with some changes, who knows what changes will be, we'll be approaching that. So that's something to think about. You just, you know, making the decision without how it impacts the accountability model and what it does to the scales and wherever the letter grade distribution is, you know, it's not as easy sometimes as it sounds. So those are just my thoughts.
So let me do
And I agree with everything he just said.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll just, again, I'm trying to just pick the low-hanging fruit here. So before we just kind of remove that row, maybe I'll like literally remove it. Is there anybody that has an objection to that? Is everybody of the same opinion that the option must be accompanied by an affirmation of ACT participation remaining? Okay, so I think this is where we're at, colleagues. And again, speak up if I didn't give you enough time, then just hit me in the chat or just unmute yourself and speak right up. I don't want to keep anybody from speaking their mind. So I guess we're at the point now where let's see how much, what the likelihood of agreement is that we want to make a recommendation. It would be just that, a recommendation to move forward as soon as possible, potentially for the 2021 academic year with WorkKeys. For those that administer it, have it available as an option that could be included, versus a point of view that says we need statewide administration supported and or we need some kind of pilot. But there might be, if you're in the 1B camp, maybe you're thinking, I want to wait for one reason or another. I'm not ready to put it in the model next academic year until, you know, more research, statewide administration, maybe there's something else we hadn't talked about. So is there anybody that wants to talk to either of those options? Maybe everything's been said that needs to be said, and in which case we can, you know, we can take a vote and see where we are and note that, or some other path forward. But let me just give a little more time for discussion before we do that.
I was asking Ms. Minotti, I thought that I understood her to say that the Lieutenant Governor has already said that it will be funded. Am I misunderstanding?
It was supposed to be funded. It was one of the things that legislation was going to be sent through. However, I said because of the COVID crisis and our state has lost, I believe they said 1/6 of its revenue, I don't think it's going through this year. They don't want to put in any burden on schools right now. So I do think it'll be next year, but it's not going to be this year.
So, you know, I think obviously 1A is the one that if it's going to be supported, we need to know. So I'm gonna see if it's agreeable to the group that we do a little vote here. I don't know a better way to do it. I was looking, does anybody know, can you do a raise hand option in Teams? Yeah, I don't know if there is a way to do it. I don't know how that works, but I don't know any other way to do it than to just say people use the chat. And the question on the table is, do you support option 1A, which is another way of saying, do you support a recommendation of moving forward to include WorkKeys in the readiness component of the accountability model next academic year? Decisions would be pending about what the threshold are. Sounds like the decisions are pending about statewide support. But do you support moving forward as soon as possible, including WorkKeys into the college readiness component? So why don't you just give me a yes or a no in the chat, if you would kind of.
Dr. Domaleski, I don't want to throw a monkey wrench in this, but 1B, there really might need to be another component there, because 1B is stating that really until statewide administration, that's when legislation pays for it. I would like to see, it not included maybe this coming year just because of all the confusion with COVID and everything else. But I don't think, let's say the state doesn't fully fund it for 2 more years or 3 more years. I'm with Dr. Pazant. Why should those districts that are already given WorkKeys be hindered from including it? Maybe if this coming year was a pilot year and then it's included regardless of whether statewide administration is done or not. And if the statewide administration comes, that funds it. But if it doesn't, those districts that are given it could include it. So it's maybe a 1B and a 1C.
Well, that's helpful. I'm trying to let's be clear about what a pilot would mean. Because I mean, there's 2 ways that people could think about a pilot. They could think about a pilot as meaning, we're exploring it, but it's open to being included in the model. Or other people, and this is kind of the way I think of a pilot, is that we're moving forward with the understanding that nothing about the model is going to change, and we're only going to explore data from where we have, we're going to use the administrations that are either available or supported to inform our thinking about what the threshold's going to be, what the impact's going to be. So I guess it's pilot. Does that mean, and in your view, Dr. Martin, does that mean that nothing about the model changes next year under a pilot scenario?
In my determination, yeah, nothing changes for this coming year. We just see impact data and what it would have done. This would have been your score with WorkKeys included. This would have been your score without it included, and give that. But I think if our group does not put forth something moving forward that we're going to include WorkKeys, then we're going to be legislated that all students take it, which is not really what we all want to do. We want to do it as a, not for all students, but for those students that just need it. And I believe if this group doesn't make some kind of recommendation moving forward that we're going to include it in the future, then that's what's going to happen.
Hey, this is Ryan. So maybe Alan can speak to this. Can we do that? As the accountability task force, can we say who is going to take it and who can't, like Dr. Martin said? Or would that have to be part of some other group? And back to the pilot discussion and the data discussion, well, I obviously and definitely want to see data and what it would look like. Now, I don't want to use the quote EL method that we used a couple of years ago, where you would have been this or you would have been that, and it's official and it's reported, and it's not official, but it's reported on the spreadsheets and all that. I would not vote in favor of that, but just at the accountability task force seeing data and how it would impact. Obviously, yes, we would want to. I would be in favor of that, but I guess my question is, we just really decide how it's measured in accountability. How would we go about saying who takes it and who doesn't take it and who can't take it and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I think somebody in the department wants to answer, they should, but I mean, everything that the accountability task force does goes as a recommendation to the department. So, I mean, I don't think the department might provide some advice to say, don't waste your time making a recommendation here that's none likely to be influential. But I think in general, the department's view has been, if you want to make a recommendation on an issue, we're glad to hear it. And but there's other channels that have to be considered before anything's finalized.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we're looking for recommendation. I know that it wouldn't be the accountability office's role to dictate whether or not students take WorkKeys. But accountability tends to direct behavior in districts and schools based on what's measured and how it's measured, and these are considerations that we have to think about whenever we're developing policy for accountability. Certainly, we don't want to develop policy that ends up with a direction in schools and districts that's undesirable, for sure. So these are things that we think about whenever we write policy. And we would do so in this regard as well.
So with that in mind, and what Alan said, I think if we, accept option one as it is with no state guidelines, then we're actually going to be giving people the option or the directing them, not directing them, but giving certainly the option to people that want to just give it both to everybody if they can somehow pay for it. So I am back to, obviously to where I was. We got to have state guidelines first, but I'd love for the task force next year to see impact data. That'd be great.
Great. And so let's see with these three options. Let's see where our support is. And it occurs to me that B and C aren't mutually exclusive. So you could support both B and C, and to me, it's a distinction without a difference right now because it means we're waiting for both statewide support and or pilot. So what I'd like to do now is, again, if there's more discussion, I'm happy to do it. I know we're way over, but is still see kind of what support there is for 1A, and so if there's no more discussion, could you just type a yes or no in the chat box on whether or not you support 1A. I see some people putting the option they like, that's fine. The question is, do you support 1A, yes or no? Give folks a few more minutes.
Chris, this is Deborah. I just want to make a real quick clarification on what year this data would be coming from. So, like if we're talking about seniors in the year 2021, would those be WorkKeys assessments that they took in that same year? Do students take these tests as seniors, or would they take them prior to, in which case, for 1920, we may not have data available?
Yeah, it's a good point, Deborah, because if students take it as a junior, yeah, but I don't know, like if could we use 11th grade administrations either in prior years or next year to look at the impact?
Any of those are possible. I was just trying to kind of align it with the way that the ACT, because it's part of the same component. And ACT is based on the senior snapshot and using the 11th grade administration from the prior year with any, additional higher scores taken since that point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, here's what I'm going to recommend, colleagues. I'm going to make a note, Deborah, if you could point here in the notes, but I don't see support for moving forward next year. I see various viewpoints saying we need to pilot and or we need to wait for statewide administration. I'm going to suggest we don't have to wrestle that to the ground on this meeting. I think what we mostly needed this meeting was to know if this was going to change the model next year. And I don't hear a voice from the task force saying that you want to move forward that aggressively. So I think we put that in the notes. We continue in our future meetings to talk about what and how we're going to pilot it next year, and we talk about what the parameters of statewide support, guidance, and administration would look like, and we think about a very serious movement towards inclusion after the 2021 year. But if that's agreeable in terms of where we wrap up this discussion, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. I think we need to move on to our next issue. Let's see if I'm. All right, I got to figure out how to stop sharing here.
Mm.
Alan, can you put the slides back up? And that might just turn off my sharing when you do that.
So I have requested control, and well, I think it just it just gave me control of your computer. Where you on the share button, you should be able to click stop sharing.
Sorry.
Do you see that?
I got it now. Yeah. Sorry about that, colleagues. I need a Teams course or something.
Now let me see if I can get mine back up. All right, you should be able to see it now.
Head to Madison Central, still listening to this. Bye.
Okay, great. Thank you. And all right, I was just making a few notes from the last discussion, so give me just 1 second to catch up here. Okay, so we are scheduled to wrap up by 11:30. We wanted to build in some time for folks to give feedback on future topics. So let's, Alan, let me ask you, of the two topics that we have remaining, the low 25 for high school and the MAP A, low 25, is there a reason to prioritize one or the other in case we don't get to one? I'll just keep it in the same order, but I just wanted to ask you first.
Well, we could, if you like, we could start with MAP A first. That may be a quick topic, and then just see where we are after that.
Yeah, that's fine. And I agree, Alan. Alan and I both thought as we prep for this meeting that once you get in advance to those slides and go backwards as needed, that that this one felt like it would be super brief. So we'll see if we were right about that. So to remind folks, we previously took up this issue in February of this year. Sorry, I was mistaken about earlier when I said when we took it up. In February of this year, is one of the earlier topics with the Accountability Task Force. We talked about the alternate assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities that typically fewer than 1% of the students in the state take. In previous years, the task force provided guidance for incorporating it into accountability. That's something that is federally required for us to do, and frankly, it's just a good idea to do because we want to include all students when factoring in student achievement. The task force gave really clear and helpful guidance in the previous meeting. I think the next slide is going to remind you of what that guidance was. And just remember, one of the reasons why it's so challenging, if you're looking at this going, wait a minute, why don't we just, why does this even rise to the task force, is because typically very low in sizes. So because so few students take the MAP A, you've got the majority of schools, and I think we showed data when we first did this in February that showed the overwhelming majority of schools only test between 1 and 4 students. So obviously, if you're looking at the lowest quartile, then that becomes a very different impact for when you're just looking at a couple of students. So next slide, please. And this was the recommendation that we agreed on back in February. We said that it's going to be a school level threshold, and because some of the options we'd considered before then were like maybe there'd be a state level threshold or some such, but we said no, there'll be a school level threshold, that we'd remove the minimum in size rule just for the purposes of applying that threshold, because to do otherwise means that almost nobody would have a low 25 because there would be so few cases where you'd even have a 25th percentile. And then we'd calculate the lowest 25 percentile at the subject level, combining all grades tested at the school. And then we develop these rules. Again, this hopefully folks will remember it showed up in the meeting summary afterwards. So hopefully you can look at that and say, yep, that's rekindling my memory here. If you test one student, that student's going to be in the low 25. You test two students, because there has to be at least one, then the lower performing of those two would be in the low 25. Then I won't read all of it to you, so forth and so on. And if multiple students have the same score, then all students with that score and lower in the low 25. So let's imagine, for example, that 3 students all have the same score. All 3 of those are going to be in the low 25. If 2 of those 3 had a lower score than the third, then those 2 would and the third wouldn't. So I know it makes your head hurt if you think about all these permutations, but we went through this earlier. I thought we put together guidance that was very thoughtful and very clearly articulated. If you go to the next slide, please, Alan. What the task force said after all that was, but can we still see impact data? And before we dot I's and cross T's on that. So we have some impact data to show you. We theorized that this would not have a substantial impact on the model, and it turns out we were right. It has very little impact. Let me just show you the, or just orient you what these graphs are showing. These are the reading low growth scores, looking at data from 2019. And on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, is the old score, and on the y-axis is what that score would be with the rules that I just described applied. And that's differentiated for elementary, middle schools, high schools, and schools with back mapping, which, Alan, you can explain better than I can if folks need to linger on that point.
Yeah, schools with K through 2 schools primarily. Okay, thanks.
So, okay, these are schools that are linked to other schools for purposes of accountability. Yeah. So you can see that, if everything falls on that diagonal line that's in red, then it's the same exact score. And overwhelmingly, every dot is a school. Overwhelmingly, those schools get the exact same score. One reason why I like to show it in a scatter plot is because you want to see if there are patterns. You want to see, for example, if it tends to be like higher scores get lowered or lower scores get raised, or if there's some sort of what I call bias in the model. That means that our recommendation is differentially impacting schools or different score bands. We don't find that. We find the result to be of a very tiny magnitude and doesn't seem to systematically affect any kind of school or any performance band. And the reason that's the case, colleagues, is simply because there's just so few students. Most schools just have only 1, 2, 3 students that are for whom this is being applied. Next slide, I think the next slide goes to mathematics. Same kind of thing. Scores are very correspondent across using the old method and the new method. And there doesn't seem to be any systematic trend. And then the final slide, I think I give you a little bit more detailed look at this. So yeah, at first when I was graphing these data, Deborah was so kind to run the data, and then I was producing some graphs and tables from it later. And when I first put together a histogram, I thought, I'll show you this sort of the distribution of score differences, but it was just silly because it was just like one large bar at 0 and indistinguishably small bars around it. So I thought, let me just table out the actual ranges here. So you see the different blocks here for elementary, high, for those back map schools. The difference in that reading score, remember we're looking at differences in scores, are it runs from -6 to +8, or -9 to +9 for mathematics for elementary school, and then you see -3 to +3 for high school, -5 to +4 for math. And then again, you see the ranges for back mapping. The mean is just a tiny bit either above or below 0, which means that overwhelmingly the score doesn't change. When it does, it doesn't even change by 1/10 of a point overall. So the changes are very minute, and this table is almost deceiving because those scores that are as low as -6 or as high as +8, and we're talking about 1 or 2 schools. I mean, these are extremely rare occurrences. So overall, I was going to show a display, but this was an example of a display that would be just not meaningful of the correspondence in the grades. There's no school that would have been assigned a different grade based on this method. So our question is, I'm happy to linger on any of the data that we just talked about, but is there anything based on the information we shared with you now, or is there something that we didn't share that you would have liked for us to share that gives you any reluctance to affirm the recommendation that we made in February? To be very blunt about it, the department is ready to move forward with it. And do you see any reason why that should not occur? So are folks okay if I take your lack of a response as an endorsement? I mean, I'll say it like this. Is there anybody that objects? If you object, would you please either speak up or put it in the chat? Okay.
In the chat, people are saying no.
Yeah, let me make sure I understand that. I see the no. I'm taking no as in to be no objection. Is that right? As opposed to no, please don't do this. Okay, thanks. Great, thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. Okay, well, we were right. That one was brief. We thought it would be. I think it's the right decision, by the way. It's important that we include it, and I think it's a reflection. This committee put a lot of thought into this model earlier, and thank you for that. I think it's a helpful improvement to the model, and it's nice to know that our suppositions about the impact were true. The last topic we have is, you can move on to the next slide. Thank you very much. So what we want to talk about is students that take algebra in different grades and how that influences their assignment in the low 25 growth group. So it's another low 25 issue, this one with a very different kind of flavor. We have some interesting data to share with you. So just to make sure everybody's clear on what we're talking about, so students can take Algebra 1 in 9th, 8th, or even 7th grade. I understand 7th grade is quite rare, but 8th grade is not so rare. There's actually a fair number of students who take it in 8th grade, even though 9th grade is the most common. Their scores for accountability are banked until they're used in grade 10. That's actually very common for a lot of state accountability models, and Mississippi follows the procedure that many states do. The decision for assigning a student into that low 25 growth group is based on their prior year score. So if you take algebra in 9th grade, then it's based on your 8th grade score. If you take an 8th grade, it's based on your 7th grade score, so forth. And what apparently has been observed, and we'll show you in very in detail in just a moment, is that distribution of prior year scores is quite different depending on which grade cohort of algebra examinees a student falls in. And the reason that this is elevating to an accountability discussion topic is that can create a situation in which a relatively higher performing student who takes algebra early are placed in the low 25 group, whereas had that student taken algebra later, they wouldn't be in a low 25 group. And why might that be something to respond to? When a higher performing student's in the low 25 group, they're displacing a lower performing student. I think the policy intent here was that we want to incent schools, educators, leaders to really think about the students who are lower performing and ways to promote their improvement. And it's also been noted before, we've talked about it multiple times in this task force, progress for higher performing students may be more difficult to achieve. We've actually looked at some data that bears that out in the past. Next slide. So yeah, this was helpful. I don't know if it's helpful to anybody but me, but when Alan and I were first talking about this, I wanted to just help get my head around it a little bit more, just to show you graphically what we're talking about here. So imagine, focus on, let's imagine that accountability had occurred as normal in 2020. Obviously it didn't. Then you'd be pulling from those 10th graders for their mathematics performance. Some of those would be 9th graders who took Algebra 1 in 2019, and their prior score would have occurred in 2018 when they were 8th graders. So their assignment into the low growth group in 2020 is based on how they did in 8th grade in 2018. And then you can sort of see how that trend follows. So let's imagine the student who's an 8th grader, that would have occurred in 2018. We'd be basing their 7th grade we'd be basing their assignment into the low 25 group based on their 7th grade math performance. And then if you had a 7th grader, you'd see how far back you'd have to reach to get their score on Algebra 1 and their prior score. And so the point is not so much the different times, but there are different characteristics. So if you just see the area that we've circled there, the question becomes, to what extent are those cohorts comparable? And if they're not comparable, then we may have some effects in those groups that are worth paying attention to and dealing with. So that's where we go to the next slide. Let's show you what those look like. So the first one is, let's look at students who had a 7th grade prior. So I want to be super clear about this because this can get hard to keep track of. If you had a student who took algebra in 8th grade and were pulling their 7th grade math score, what does that distribution look like? It's just a histogram. You've got the scores on the x-axis and the frequency or the number of cases on the y-axis. You see a little bit of data there in the chart. Had a mean of 779 on that 7th grade distribution, and the lowest quartile threshold would be 769. Again, be super clear. This is a subset of examinees. Only those 8th grade algebra students, what did their 7th grade priors look like? It's a pretty favorable distribution. That's different than the distribution of all 7th graders, and I'll show you exactly what that comparison looks like soon. So the next graph. So here's the 8th grade priors now. So these are, I think, the most typical model. When a student took algebra in grade 9, what did the 8th grade math performance look like for those students? Again, we're interested in the characteristics of the prior distribution. In this case, there's many more, so you see a much denser distribution. The lowest quartile threshold in here is 846. And yeah, you'll see in all these graphs, there's a big spike at the max score, that's another topic, which I won't take a side road on, but a lot of students, there's sort of a ceiling effect with the test, and a lot of students get the max score. I got one more histogram here. This one took a little time to put together, so let me see if I can help people unpack it a little bit. But I found this one to be remarkably illustrative to help people see the issue that we're trying to solve. So I hope it's clear from the way you can see things, but there's two histograms that are overlaid here. I hope you can see in the bottom right, notice there are some green bars, and they're sort of in front of the stack of blue bars. What we're comparing here is what does let's look at all 7th grade math scores, and let's pull out the distribution for just those students who went on to take algebra in 8th grade and compare them with everybody. So I mean, to me, this was a fascinating graph, because you can see the distribution of green bars is shifted to the right, which just means it's a much more, and obviously the reason the bars are smaller is because there's many fewer students in 7th grade who go on to take algebra in 8th grade. So just that subset's a smaller group, so you get shorter bars, but they're higher performing. Maybe that doesn't surprise anybody. And so most of those scores are shifted near the top. The sort of takeaway here, not to bury the lead, is that if you do the lowest quartile based on just those students who are going to take algebra, you're going to get a 769 as the threshold. Any student who got lower than a 769 is going to be in a low growth group. But if we'd looked at all examinees in grade 7, that goes all the way down to a 750. And if you look where the 750 shows up on those green bars, hardly any students who took algebra in 8th grade would be in the low growth group. That's just because, again, it's a higher performing group of students. So I'm going to pause there just to make sure I didn't blow past anybody in the data we showed you. All this was in service to simply making the point there really are different cohort characteristics. So it's not kind of a made up issue.
So Chris, thinking through this, are we looking at students when they are in 10th grade and we're actually using their banked score to look back and say, was your score in 9th grade, 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade?
Correct.
And then are we rank ordering the 9th grade scores and taking the lowest 25%, the 8th grade scores and taking the lowest 25%, the 7th grade scores taking the lowest 25%, 6th grade scores taking the lowest 25%?
Yes, if I understand your question, Christy, you're trying to get clarification on what the current practice is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and Alan and others, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the current practice is you just use that cohort and you apply this decision separately at every cohort. So for my 9th grade examinees, I'm just looking at those examinees when they were grade 8 kids. For my 8th grade examinees, I'm just looking at those kids when they were in 7th grade. And that's the reason why we have these inequitable distributions. Is that right, Alan?
That's correct. And there's one other issue that's taken effect in here on top of this, and that's if you may recall in the business rules that there's a requirement for in the event that there's less than 10 identified in the low 25 for a particular grade level, then all students are identified in the low 25. And so what we've heard back from schools and districts is that in some cases all of their students who take Algebra 1 in the 8th grade are being identified in low 25, and certainly in many cases more students are being identified in low 25 that take algebra early than probably should be.
So by the logic, so think I'm trying to think through this from the end of year assessment. So if you're looking at kids taking the 7th grade end of year assessment, you're looking at those kids as your cohort of kids compared to what their prior year score was. So for EOCs, wouldn't we look at everybody we're using in that EOC calculation in the current year, so say 1920, anybody that's been compiled into that low 25% Algebra 1 calculation, and then parse it out by prior year grades, and then take the lowest performing of the kids that we're including in the Algebra 1 calculation by grade from prior years? So your starting group is your 10th graders, or whatever year you're including them for real in Algebra 1 for their score, and then looking at their prior by grade.
Yeah, so Christy, I'm not sure if I'm following you, but let me check. So are you saying that looking just with the cohort, you're raising a question about that versus just looking at all examinees in the prior grade as the basis for the threshold?
Right. So we don't, when we're, well, I guess it's hard to do with the regular grade, but when we're looking at the current 7th grade end of year math test, we're looking at those students and what they did the prior year. And so only those students who are in 7th grade with a math score are included, and they're only included if they have a prior year score. and we're looking at that to identify the low 25%. So when we're including kids for high school, we should be looking at only those kids that are taking the Algebra 1 test and looking at what their prior year scores were, and then separating those out by grade because it's on a vertical scale or a different scale, different floors and ceilings depending on what grade you're in, and looking at if you're included this year in the Algebra 1 model, what was your last year's prior score? And if it was 9th grade, you're comparing the 9th graders' prior year score to all the 9th graders that took Algebra 1 that are being included in this model, saying, okay, take the bottom 25% of the 9th grade scores of the kids that are included in the Algebra 1 growth model. And then the Algebra 1 growth model will also have kids with prior year 8th grade scores, and will also have kids with prior 7th grade scores. So you're only looking at the kids who have an Algebra 1 score that you're using in the current year accountability calculation based on whatever their prior year score was, but not bringing in the rest of the kids that would be prior year kids that don't have an Algebra 1 score, right?
Actually, hang on a second and let me show you the recommendation we're going to make, because it's possible we're going to be saying the same thing. But I can't claim that I fully followed everything about what you just said, Christy. But in just a second, we're going to transition to what we think is a possible solution. And why don't you think about that in reference to the thoughts you just shared with us, and we can come back to that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we thought would be a good way to deal with this, because well, I think I already sort of gave the rationale for why you might want a solution here, is to put all the prior scores in the same bin regardless of when the test was taken. And again, I feel like we're saying the same thing, Christy, but
the first point, yes.
Okay. You do have to, so I'm a psychometrician, so I sort of get a little restless if we just ignore the score scale here. The score scales, they're just different scores, so can't drop. I'm sorry, was somebody about to say something?
Oh, no, right, but do we necessarily have to standardize them, or can't we just look at them as 9th grade scores versus 8th grade scores versus 7th grade scores and take the low 25% of each of those groups?
Well, if we're going to keep a cohort model and their prior was attained in different grades, they have different scores on different scales.
Right.
So to do otherwise would be to abandon the cohort approach.
Well, your cohort is your Algebra 1 takers, right? And then instead of having to do some kind of statistical standardization to get them on the same scale, we know all 9th grade scores are on the same scale. All 8th grade scores are on the same scale. 7th grade scores are on the same scale. 6th grade scores are on the same scale.
Yeah, so let me see if I can distinguish between what I think are the two ideas here. So let's just deal with 9th graders for a second. If you have 9th graders who took a prior as 8th graders, that's easy. If you have, if you've got some 8th graders and they're prior 7th grade, so already I'm at a cul-de-sac here, Christy, because I'm saying your priors aren't always coming from the same test. Your priors are coming from either 9th, 8th, either 8th, 7th, or in some cases 6th. So if you just used one grade, then you've got some students who aren't in that cohort and in fact never took that as a prior. Yeah, and actually, Alan, go back, if you would please, to slide 20. Maybe that's helpful for us to get our heads around this. Right, so my 9th graders, I go to my 8th grade group, but for that 2020 10th grade group, some of those kids were 8th graders. I can't use 8th grade as a prior. That was their I mean, they took Algebra 1 then. They don't have an 8th grade score.
No, but they have a 7th grade score.
Right.
So that's their prior.
Correct.
So I think, so it's kind of like what we do when we aggregate at the school level for an elementary school or a middle school for end of year tests. We look at the low 25% by taking this current year's cohort of students that are in the school for the low 25% calculation, or for the learning gains calculation. We look to see what their prior score was, regardless of what test they're taking this year. And in order to be included in that low 25% calculation, their prior score came in 3 different grades. It either came in 7th grade or 6th grade or 5th grade. And we look and we take the low 25% of 7th graders, the low 25% of 6th graders, the low 25% of 5th graders. And we make that the low 25% group for the school. So if you kind of apply that same type of logic to Algebra 1, you're looking at the Algebra 1 cohort in 2020 as the school, and you're looking at where did their prior scores come from, regardless of the year and regardless of the grade. You're separating them out by grade. So some of them might be 9th graders, some of them might be 10th graders, but their prior score would be in 8th grade, and all of those would be looking aggregated for a prior score. Take the low 25%. 7th graders' prior year scores would be part of the low 25%, 6th graders, 5th graders. So yeah, that kind of applied logic. But then I think then you might go ahead.
No, I think I know what you're saying, and let me try it out again. You're saying don't look at the cohort, just look at all the examinees in the grade.
Well, so look at all the 2020 Algebra 1. Who's going to be included in that Algebra 1 2020 learning gains calculation? And it might be kids from multiple grades, 10th grade, 9th grade, it might be banked scores from 8th grade or 7th grade or whatever. And because of that, they're all going to have a different prior grade score, because you might have 4 different grades represented in the 2020 Algebra 1 score. So you'll have 4 different grades represented in prior year scores. And if you took the lowest 25% of each of those prior grades to aggregate it up.
Yeah.
Christy, it sounds like you're describing what we're currently doing.
I feel like what I'm hearing is, so there's what we're currently doing is just looking at the cohort, which we talked about. I feel like what you're saying is, like, go to that slide 23 for a second, Alan. I feel like what you're saying, Christy, and again, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, is don't use the threshold for the green bars, use the threshold for the blue bars. Because blue is everybody in 7th grade, green is everybody in 7th grade who went on to algebra. Am I understanding you right? Or maybe neither of us are understanding you right.
I think so. I think I'm just going to listen for a little while, because I don't think I'm.
Yeah, it does. It makes my head hurt thinking about it. It's hard to keep track of. Let me finish saying what I think is a possible solution. But already, I mean, you're making me think there's another way around this, which is just abandon the cohort model and use the threshold for all examinees. I'd have to think a little bit more about what the implications of that would be, and if we might be left not identifying 25% would be my fear. But I'd have to think about that a little bit more.
Let me also, I feel I need to point out this other piece, because there's kind of 2 pieces here. One is the question of, are we truly identifying the lowest quartile based on that grade level performance? And the other piece is what I've also heard from the schools is that all of their kids who took Algebra 1 in the 8th grade are being included in the low 25. And I think the reason for that is, let me see if I can share this business rule. Bear with me just a second, because my computer's running slow.
Well, wouldn't the reason they'd all be or 8th graders would be overrepresented would be because the same thing if you did that at an elementary school, 3rd graders or prior year scores would be overrepresented because it's just lower on the scale to begin with? That if you group everybody together that had prior 7th, 8th, and 6th grade scores, then whoever has the earlier grade is more likely to have the lowest scores because of how the scale works. So if you're taking it in
right now it's not combining them like that.
Okay.
It's grouping by the prior year, so that you're only ever comparing scores within the same grade when we're doing the low 25.
And here's the thing. So if I've got, let's say my district has one high school, and well, our district has multiple high schools. Let's say that I have fewer than 40 students who took Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, and now they're in the 10th grade, and we're calculating low 25 by prior year grade level. Because of this rule, all of those students who took 8th grade or took Algebra 1 in 8th grade, all of them are being included in the low 25.
But why would they be? When you would aggregate up for an Algebra 1, there'd be kids that weren't 8th graders that are also in that Algebra 1 cohort. So it's not like when we're doing it at the school level that you have to have at least 10 3rd graders, at least 10 4th graders, at least 10 5th graders. It's at least 10 across the board. So it might be, 3 3rd graders, 4 4th graders, and 3 5th graders to get to your 10, right?
I think the point is you have to combine the cohort in order to solve this problem. We've got to find a way to mush these groups together and consider them one big group and not multiple cohorts in order to deal with both the differences in the threshold and the effects of these small n sizes. At least that's my take.
Right, because the next one, at the grade level, a minimum of 4 students with valid scale scores are required.
Yeah, and we're trying to treat, when we get to 10th grade, we're trying to sort of, at least this is how I see it, trying to ignore this banking business and just say, let's pretend that we have these 10th graders with math scores and we want to find the lowest 25% in order to do another check on their progress. And at that point, you don't want the methods in the application to be widely divergent depending on which cohort you were in along the way. Now that you're a 10th grader, what do we know about how you did in algebra and how you did and how you stand among all of those students with banked scores? So maybe I just have 1 or 2 more slides, and then let's see where we are. I'll have to watch the clock. I've got a hard stop at 11:30, so I want to see how far we can get here. Alan, I see you frozen on my screen. I don't know if others are seeing the same.
No.
Frozen in a thoughtful pose, I might add.
I may have run out of bandwidth here. Hang on, let me
Yeah.
close some things. Maybe it'll let me share.
There you go. Okay.
Is it back up?
Yeah, I see it. And this really is the last slide, so I'll talk fast. And I hope Christy, this is helpful. I don't know, it might actually be counterproductive. So the idea here is, so let's take let's take all these sources of priors. They can come from 8, 7, or 6. Let's combine them all into one distribution, and let's do a cut on that distribution. And the only thing we need to do is just standardize those scores. I can think of like 3 different ways off the top of my head to do that. You can make them all z-scores. You can transform the 6th and 7th distributions to take on the characteristics of the 8th. I think that's like one of the least complicated problems to solve. And come up with a single threshold, which, by the way, I think will have the effect of ignoring the cohort effect and being more responsive to the overall grade threshold when it comes to assigning that low 25 group. I also think it'll solve the problem of disproportionately identifying those students who were on an accelerated math course. But that's all we had in terms of trying to describe the situation and describe a potential solution. And my last slide was just simply to ask folks if you have do you agree with that proposed approach? I'm so sorry that we don't have that much time left, but I'd love to hear people's reactions.
So going back to that last slide, this is a question for Alan. The way it's calculated now, do you require the 8th grade priors to have at least 10? And if not, you throw them all in?
I may be off on that. Deborah, can you help me on?
Yep. That is correct, because all of the calculations for low 25 are based on the prior grade level. So in a high school, where you don't have other, where you don't have other students, like this would apply more for the 7th and 6th grade students, but it's looking at all of the 8th grade prior scores and determining the lowest 25 of those. Separately, it's going to look at the 7th grade prior scores and determine the lowest 25 of that. So the minimum 4 and 10 are being applied at that level.
Okay, so then what was that business rule before about the grade level, the one after the minimum of 10? Because I thought when we were looking at it, when we did the low 25%, we did it aggregate across multiple grade levels. So your low 25% had to be at least 10. But if you're doing this just for an elementary school and you're just looking at low reading gains or low math gains, you're looking at 3, 4, and 5, and you didn't need 10 in grade 3, 10 in grade 4, 10 in grade 5. You just needed 10 across those 3 grades. So I don't know, Chris, if you can flip back to slide 24, I think it was the minimum grade level. Maybe not. You had the rule on one of the slides.
Oh, I had pulled it up and shared it separately.
Oh.
And this may be, with our time constraint here, we may just need to say, we'll bring this back up at the next meeting. Maybe this is the start of a discussion just to outline, that we've received feedback from schools and districts that this may be an issue, and we think that there's merit to that. We just may need to investigate a little further on what's happening exactly.
Yeah, as a practical matter, I really do have to excuse myself here in the next few minutes. And so maybe colleagues, this is going to have to be a to be continued topic. I think I also apologize we didn't get a chance to do the round robin and ask people future topics. So let me just make an invitation that if there's anything that you want to maybe just email Alan, if there are if you either have feedback on this that we weren't able to get to because it took us a while to get through the slides, or if you have suggestions for future meetings, please feel free to just email that after the meeting, and we'll pull together your feedback and use that to inform our next steps. But let me just be quiet and say, is there anything that anybody wants to add in the very few minutes we have remaining about this topic or anything else? I see Dr. Martin's raised a question about would this be the same approach used for biology taken prior to 9th grade? Alan, Deborah, are you aware of some similar effects that are occurring in science?
I'm not. Like I said, the feedback that I got was really around students taking algebra early, but I would think that we'd want to apply consistent logic for banked scores if we looked at changing this.
Well, right now, that's science isn't part of the low 25.
Right. Well, that's
right.
We don't calculate growth for science.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else, colleagues? I'll stop there for a second. Well, I actually think we got a lot done. Yeah,
the next meeting. We having another meeting on the slide there.
I think maybe we should do that remotely. Maybe we should send out a poll or just put out some suggested dates. But it sounds like we've got some loose ends to tie up. I don't know, Alan, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of foresee some additional meetings. We've got a lot to work through, and we're going to have a lot more information about what accountability and assessment is going to look like next year to discuss as well. So, Ryan, you're not going to be going on extended vacation for the next month, are you?
No, you let me know when, and I'll be there. No, that's good to hear. I wanted, to obviously this group to be included in all that. So much to discuss with the COVID stuff and these outgoing issues that we haven't solved, and we even continue the 3A, 3B. So that's great to hear. Thanks.
Well, folks, we're going to have to let that be the last word. I'm sorry we had to end relatively abruptly, but we did get a lot accomplished, even if we have a lot more to do. So I'm going to say goodbye, and we'll follow up with meeting notes and reach out about the next meetings. Thank you all.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.